the defining moment of my life, of my entire life, okay, was at my lunar return.
Yeah.
Yeah.
27 years old.
27 years old. Yeah, I decided that, I wasn't born to be a football player. There's something more, right? The expectations of what my role is supposed to be in the community. I was literally in my locker one day and I was looking around and I was like, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? Okay, so the main thing I wanted to talk about today was I want to talk about Strongest Planet, but my interest in Strongest Planet it comes from the realization that there is a distinction between signs and planets, Yeah. And so much of astrology, I meet someone and tell them I'm an astrologer, and they say, "Guess my sign," and then you have to back them into the conversation that you're more than just your sun sign. So I feel like even in astrological communities, the planets are kind of on the back burner. And at least in my training, I open up Inner Sky and it says the planets are the what, right? And that's, to me, it's really stuck with me, that idea. And the other thing I thought is when I first was introduced to astrology, it was through Vedic astrology. And I remember the first program that I purchased and I put my information in, right? On that opening screen, they have a graph called Shadballa, which means 6 strengths. And it's a graph, a bar graph showing the strengths of the planets. And so I think partly because that was my first introduction to astrology, that idea of planetary strength is always in the back of my mind. And when I crossed over to Western astrology, it's like that idea, I didn't see it anywhere. I didn't see it anywhere. And so when I found the Church of Light Astrodynes material, it intrigued me. And so I just really started studying it a lot and playing with it. And synchronicity of it is right about the time that Soul was born. And I remember being in the hospital and looking at the clock, and the doctor came in and said, "Okay, Linnea's next," and I was like, "Okay, he's going to be a Sag rising," and looking at the chart, that would have been the only thing in fire, and so some other women go into labor, and so Soul's birth gets pushed back, and he's born with the rising sign at 0 degrees Capricorn. So looking at a chart, and there's 0 planets in fire signs. And then I do my little algorithm and I see that Mars is the strongest planet. And so growing up watching that, it's just been interesting. It's been really interesting. And it's made me feel
he's a Mars type,
He's a Mars type. Exactly. Exactly. And in the Book of Fire, right, we get to meet Mars. So this idea that we have to include the planets too, is really what I'm after here. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so immediate reaction to this is this is really obvious, but it sort of fits with what you're saying, fits perfectly. That in mythology, Mars was a god. Mars was a person in essence, with a character and a nature. Venus, is a female person. Jupiter, the king of the gods. So that our ancestors use planets to convey personality types to us. And this gets into one of my favorite soapboxes, that a rigorous understanding of a sign it's a psychological motivation. It's something you wake up in the morning and you're hungry for it. And so Jupiter, the king of the gods, and put it in Pisces, and ideally, you want to be a saint. You want to be the most spiritual person that you can possibly be, or the town's biggest drunkard, or something like that. But see, the idea is then a Pisces motivation interacts with that Jupiter king archetype. If it's in Aries, you want to rule the world or the corporation. So the signs are not personalities. it's a little hard to prize them apart, but they're like values and agendas, and the planets are the people up there.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not sure this is true, but at least in my imagination, I imagine it was Aries season, and this is before Aries season existed,
Yeah.
and people watching nature, they notice that the nice, the sheep, right, are nice, or the rams are nice, and then they get all stirred up in Aries season, and they notice the kids born that time of year, and it might say the god Aries or the god Mars is strong at this time of year.
Yeah, yes.
Right? Because the idea of that the way we talk about it, the planets rule the signs, and this idea that these gods or these personalities were more present certain times of the year, and it's almost as if we dedicate those times of the year to those gods.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the whole rulership question and all its complexity just leaps out there. And so, when Scorpio season starts, we're honoring both the great god Pluto, but also the great god Mars.
Yeah.
There's just very simply for our ancestors, at least Northern Hemisphere, Scorpio season, it's getting cold. The crops aren't growing anymore. Uh, it's dangerous. You gotta be courageous to face what's coming,
Yeah.
and that's that really primal Mars energy. Now we've tended to psychologize Scorpio more because we all have thermostats. We're not so worried about the winter.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, when you started studying astrology, like what was the relationship between planets and signs? Yeah.
I have to say, this this may not be totally fair, but in the reading I did back then, I felt like signs, planets, and I'd add houses were all pretty much blurred together. They were just, bottom line, here are the keywords for Mars, and they look a whole lot like the keywords for Aries and the keywords for the first house. I think that the astrologers, I'm sure, helped people and all that back then, but there was a sloppiness there intellectually. I think we have a lot more rigor now in terms of understanding the exact function of signs, planets, and houses.
Yeah. 'Cause I know in a lot of older astrology books, you'll read, Mars and Leo or the fifth house.
Yeah, like they're the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, exactly. And I know for me it was frustrating as a student,
Yeah.
seeing that content. And I think it was so refreshing. Started reading The Inner Sky, and it was the first time that it was broken down. The planets are the what, right? The signs are the why and the how, and the houses are the where.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just ask a Capricorn because we want to break the universe down into parts, clear labels. This is your job. This is your job. I guess some of it is just me projecting onto the cosmos, but I do think the idea that planets are drives in your mind. They're like the people in your head. The part of you that wants to be the king, the part of you that doesn't want to be the king. Meet Jupiter, meet Neptune, and
Yeah.
well, they're arguing, and then each one of them has a set of desires, emotional agendas, priorities, drives. That's the sign conditioning the personality of that person in your head. And then, where are they going to show up? What are they going to do in your life? And that's where the houses come in. Is this going to manifest in your voice or your career or your intimate life, or where will it happen?
Yeah. And when I'm introducing planets to people who don't know anything about astrology, I'll often say the planets are like the voices in our head.
Yeah, yeah,
And when I introduce the idea that some voices are louder than others,
yeah,
that's what I move into what I call planetary strength or volume.
yeah.
You know, and the way that we calculate planetary strength is it's based on two principles. One is that planets in certain houses are stronger. Planets are stronger in certain houses than others.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and two, that planets will gain influence, power, based on the amount and nature and proximity to exact of the aspects it makes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is that, in your mind, is that sound astrology?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Planets, as you say, they're very in centrality in a person. The the problem with thinking in terms of the strongest planet, I mean, it's a good system, and I support it. But the reality is, somebody might be like, Mr. Saturn. Saturn just wins all the prizes. Somebody else might be, Saturn by a nose ahead of Venus,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's going to be a very different kind of person. So, in writing this stuff for Lila, we have to accept an oversimplification that will sometimes be kind of glaring, like the Saturn Venus person I just talked about, and other times strongest planet. It's like, yeah, exactly, and so one could criticize our system on that basis. But here's how I would field that criticism: that sun signs divide the world into 12 types. Astrologers know we can do a lot better than that, but sun signs work. They're valuable. Myers-Briggs, that famous test. I'm an ENTJ. So there's like 16 types, and that kind of crude categories, but effective. Enneagram, 9 different types. My favorite here, for people who complain about, 12 types, that's not granular enough. My favorite refutation there is the common practical usage of the words introvert and extrovert, where we divide the world into 2 types. And so nowadays, anybody would understand the following sentence. She's not going to your party. It's not because she doesn't like you. It's because she's an introvert. Everybody would immediately understand that. Even a twofold typology can be useful. It makes astrology look really granular. With the strongest planet, we're basically dividing up into 10 types. That's a bit elastic. I guess we could use Chiron, we could use Eris. Those are somewhat more conjectural. But it's just a typology, and humans have used them since the beginning of time.
Yeah. And what I've appreciated about the strongest planet typology is it's still using the astrological language,
Yeah,
and it gives us another dimension, or in a sense another tool to work with.
yeah,
Because the modern system it's really useful, is that we can say the primal triad, we can say we know that the sun is going to be central in someone's life. We know that the moon and its sign is going to be central in someone's life. And we know the same for the ascendant. But
yeah,
there are some people that come to astrology where I've seen they might have a really powerful Neptune or really powerful Uranus. And if an astrologer is not privy to that, it's something that they could completely miss out on. And someone might feel that a part of them is not there.
yeah, yeah,
An example that comes to my mind, and when I'm defending strongest planet to people, I use is the first time that you and I sat down for a reading,
yeah,
is the first thing you said to me, right? It was really about addressing my Pluto in the first, squaring the moon in the 10th.
yeah,
You said there's things that people don't want to hear, and part of your job, right, is to deliver that to them, right? And my 2 strongest planets are the moon and Pluto.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
And starting there, rather than starting with me being a Gemini so much, it like got to the point and it spoke to me. And we know as astrologers, sometimes we look at a chart and there's something that jumps out at us,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What's scary is the things that should jump at us but don't,
Yeah.
because we're blinded by our own methodology. The
Yeah.
strongest planet perspective, when it's added to basics like sun, moon, and ascendant, just a little more focus, a little more
Yeah.
clarity. Your sun, soul, my grandson, it feels like,
Yeah.
he he's a fine illustration, he's a Marsy kid, and yet that doesn't really jump out unless we're thinking of strongest planet.
Yeah, and yeah, that was the example that kind of pushed me over the edge to maybe taking the strongest planet a little bit more seriously.
Yeah,
Um, and Lila, the way we present the strongest planet, we put it right up there with the primal triad. So it's taken into consideration, and it does add I think a little bit more specificity. But you also pointed out is that we're going to miss some of the times when someone has a secondary or even a tertiary planet that's just like that grades just a little bit weaker, and our attempt to deal with that is if there are two planets, like you're a good example, in your chart is the sun, very powerful, Jupiter also very powerful, in a lot of cases when that occurs, the two strongest planets are actually an aspect to each other. So the evolution of it is not so much talking about one strongest planet, but talking about essentially a strongest aspect. Because again, in my chart, the strongest aspect or the two strongest planets in aspect, it's the Pluto Moon square. And it'd be difficult to it'd be difficult to pull them apart. But I will say, I was thinking about this last night. If when I was a young football player, someone had sat me aside and had a conversation with me about my moon, it's something that I could have been more proud of and leaned into more than been ashamed or picked on because I had a soft voice or I was more sensitive than the other football players, or the social anxiety. Right? I could have read I'm an introvert. It's not right. Even though there's this expectation that I'm supposed to be this grand warrior, if I had something, just the language, it's the language to go to know the prominence of my moon, it would have been very helpful to me.
Yeah, exactly. And when we first started talking about strongest planet, we're working strictly with the Astrodyne system, Church of Light system.
Yes.
And unless my memory is failing me, you by that system you were identified with Mars.
And I was identified still with the moon. Yeah.
Were you?
I was, yeah. And what we added to the system is in the Church of Light system, they don't use the nodes. But it didn't make sense as evolutionary astrologers to say that the nodes have no influence. And so and so what I did is I took the algorithm and I said we're going to include the south node.
Yeah. The ruler of the south node would be hugely important.
Yeah. And giving more weight to the ruler of the south node and giving more weight to the ruler of the ascendant.
Yeah.
Those are the additions or the tweaks that we've made to fit more of our system. Yeah.
So how does Mars rate in your chart or in the hierarchy?
Mars is the third strongest planet.
Third strongest, yeah. Interesting. Because I mean, with all the shall we say gladiator stuff, in your background in this life, it would seem there would be strong Mars. But so I've gotten to know you humanly. You don't feel like a Mars guy, You kind of look like a Mars guy, but there's the healing energy, the gentle energy fits, and that Plutonian intensity. So those two planets, they're kind of neck and neck. If the system just assigned you one planet, would it be
the defining moment of my life? My entire life. Yeah. Okay. And was that my lunar return? Where it fits is
27 years old.
27 years old. Yeah. I decided that, I wasn't born to be a football player. There's something more, right? The expectations of what my role is supposed to be in the community. I was literally in my locker one day and I was looking around and I was like, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
And I just asked the question for the first time, and it shocked me that the feeling I got back was no, And immediately I saw an image of me helping people. It just it was spontaneous. And it was shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, of course, I can't help but think of that spectacular Aries south node you have, Mars in Aries conjuncted, as I recall, right?
Yeah, conjunct. Yeah,
So, the hand of karma, was so powerful with you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But you broke free of it and didn't join the 27 club, but I suspect you understood why a lot of folks did.
It was the one time in my life that the thought of suicide crossed my mind.
Yeah.
The only time. I mean, as a kid, sometimes I thought about it, but as an adult, it was the
Yeah.
one time where I thought my life is over. You
Uh-huh.
know? That the world knows that I'm a pothead. My reputation that I've spent my whole life working on is destroyed. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
ooh, like,
Of course, now you're a respectable businessman.
yes. Yeah, leading into it, right? The Neptune opposing my midheaven. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
When I had my opportunity to join the 27 club, it was you know, I had a boring, soul-numbing clerical job with a university. I was basically a hippie, and this was how I was paying my rent. And I saved up $4,000, and I bought a sailboat. And my girlfriend and I just went sailing, and kind of becoming Jimmy Buffett or something like that, sailing down the East Coast. And we were like 4 or 5 months on the waves. And when I came back, I just went full-time astrology,
yeah,
opened my practice, didn't try to get a job, and it exploded. It just took off, but it was right there at that lunar return. It's
yeah,
such an amazing time to talk about.
yeah, yeah. I mean, my lunar return is also when I found astrology.
Yeah, yeah, you
Yeah,
found yourself,
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so yeah, this was an insight. I mean, it's obvious when you look at my chart because that moon is up there at the top of the chart. But these are the kinds of insights that I've been able to draw from using the strongest planet.
yeah,
Um, and Linnea is another example. And she's a Capricorn rising, a Capricorn moon, right? That's obvious in her chart. But she was an attorney. She passed 2 bar exams, right? And as we looked at her strongest planet, second house Mercury,
uh-huh,
really like jumped out and allowed her to make connections to things. Because it's funny, when I first met Linnea, we were at a party and I wasn't hitting on her, but she's a very interesting lady. And so I was curious as to what's your sun sign? And she looked at me and she said, I don't know, but I'm a Pisces. And I smiled and I said, yeah, that's your sun sign. And I said, Pisces, the mystic, and she kind of looked at me sideways and she said, I'm a corporate attorney. But subsequently, a couple of years later, I find out underneath that corporate attorney,
yeah.
there's a mystic.
Uh-huh.
There's a mystic there. And the
Yeah,
thing that stuck out to me when I first met Linnea is that I could have these weird, mystical, metaphysical conversations, and she could understand what I was saying and respond back. And I remember the first time I met her, the words that came out of my mouth is, "You are brilliant."
yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Her Mercury is in Pisces, is that
It's in
correct?
Pisces. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's in
yeah,
Pisces.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But I love a story like this because it's puts the E in evolutionary, so to speak, in that being an attorney is, it's intellectually demanding work. It's complicated. You got to read, and there is that clear Mercury signature, and so Linnea gets on that track and becomes an attorney. But as time goes by and she individuates and comes to know herself better, she's realizing that there's plenty of Mercury here, but there's not enough Pisces,
yeah,
plenty
yeah,
of second house because of money issues, but
yeah,
again, not enough Pisces. And so now we see her operating in broad terms as a spiritual teacher. I
yeah,
mean, that's what Lila is really about. And so she's evolved into a more individuated relationship with her strongest planet. And that's the
yeah,
kind of stuff that's the drum I like to beat, with people. It's okay, if you're a Saturn type, okay, great, but it's a path. It's not a mask you're going to wear for the rest of your life. It's a road to walk. It's a road of discovery. And that Saturn energy can operate in more spiritualized and sophisticated ways over time. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of what we're doing with Lila. So we're not just putting somebody in a box.
Yeah, that's a key point. And I'm 47, almost 48 now, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I'm starting to appreciate is if you're looking at a chart, you have to know the age of the person.
Yeah.
You know, I mentioned that I married a couple. I officiated a wedding this past weekend, and I spent some time with the couple before the wedding. And her chart, her is one of those situations where when she first gave me her birth time, it was 10:30, and I put it in, and the strongest planet was Neptune. And then when we met, she said, actually, I looked at my birth certificate. I was born at 10:25, so I changed the time. Her strongest planet became Venus, right?
Oh, just 5 minutes made the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Venus was in the 10th house, opposing the Neptune in the 4th house.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Right. And so either way, right, you get this powerful Venus Neptune opposition.
Yeah.
You know? And in her chart, the Venus Neptune opposition was squaring Mars Saturn in the first. Yeah. Okay? It's T square, But that the Venus in the 10th, they're like, and when you meet this woman, like extremely attractive and kind words, and I'm thinking if I was talking to this woman when she was 18, there might be more warnings, about imagining someone to be different than they actually are in relationship. Yeah. But I'm talking to a 45-year-old who was an 18-year-old who had those experiences. And when I first met her, the story was a beautiful, kind, attractive woman, 44, never been married, never been married, right? And I said, and I imagine, people are surprised, when they look at you and they say, wow, you've never been married, and I say, good for you, I said, holding on to the dream, holding on to the vision. Right? Because again, a young person with that vision, they're going to have to learn the hard way. Someone who's been through it, right? And she had the story where I almost got married, but it wasn't quite the right one. It wasn't quite the right one, right? And I'm telling you, officiating this wedding, it was like another world, right? It's like you could feel the Neptune Venus in a more mature form. Mm-hmm. Right. And it touched everyone there. I mean, I woke up the next morning and I loved Linnea a little bit more, because of that, what she embodied, what she represented.
Yeah. It's just listening to you. I feel we're talking about strongest planet stuff and that can be so useful, but it lacks the specificity and the individuality that comes from, she's a Venus type. But Neptune opposite was Mars square, Pluto square, something.
Yes.
And you start to really get the sense of the whole human drama, the uniqueness of the challenges and the opportunities she's facing. It's you start, big subject. It's like when I'm teaching astrology, I generally have a classroom full of people who have at least, read the inner sky. Some of them are really advanced, but they all have some sense of like sun, moon, and ascendant and houses. And it's like then astrology opens up. It's so rich. But if you're talking to just a group of intelligent people who don't know anything about astrology, it's like I wish I could just give them a pill that was like a 6-week class, and then we can talk. It's such a powerful system, but there's a bit of a price of admission. You can spend your whole life studying astrology, of course. It's as complicated as life, but I don't like to overcomplicate it. A 6-week course, or something like that will kind of get people going, and it gives them the price of admission into some of the richness of what we can see.
Yeah, I mean, Lene and I were just discussing this on the trip. Is we're meeting new people, and what are you guys into? And it's like okay, it was like, how do we introduce such a complex subject that has such an interesting reputation, right? And bring it down to earth to turn this into a useful conversation.
Yeah.
It's like what we're wrestling with all the time, but I feel like we're getting somewhere. And and back to the example of my friend Nancy, the beautiful Venus in the 10th. It's even if I just say, right, I just start talking about Venus to her, and she connects to what I'm talking about, then what comes out of her mouth and the stories that she tell, right? It brings the Neptune in, it brings it brings all. I've noticed this time and time again. If I'm talking to a client and I get on a subject and I say something that taps into the planet, they provide the context and they start really telling stories that give me information about how the aspects and the placement is expressing in their lives.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm just want to put a caboose on the train of what I was saying a little while ago about how we wish we could give people the 6-week course, in pill form or zap them, but obviously we can't, and so that's where sun sign astrology used to be like the entry point. It's a watered down, weakened version of what we can do, but there's something in it. And so feed somebody a little information about their sun sign or their strongest planet,
Yeah.
and they, they get the hook in their mouth. They think, oh, this is interesting. This works for me, and they start to pursue it. It's been in my lifetime, the only entry point was sun signs. That was it. But now within the digital age, we can give somebody a subscription to Lila, and they, in plain English, they can read about everything in their chart. And it's like a simple doorway into the system. And I just, it was, you'd have the stepping stone of sun signs and then about a 30-foot jump, to get to the real thing. But now there's a lot of stepping stones. And I think that's terrific. It's probably why astrology is being accepted and more widely understood and appreciated. I mean, we're living through a slow renaissance in terms of us not looking like idiots anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the motivations for creating Lila is it's related to the 6-week course, because there's a concentrated, you're studying every day for 6 weeks and you're learning the system. But it's something else when you're actually going through the experiences in your life and you have something to reflect upon, to give some perspective about what you're actually experiencing. Because I've started to teach a little bit, and what I've noticed, a lot of people that are attracted to astrology, it's great because it's a way to frame their experience. But sometimes it's almost as if it becomes dogma because they're so focused on what the books or other authors have said, and less focused on what's actually showing up in their lives.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, the great gap between the reality of life and the reality of what we read in the more conventional books, it's a big subject. Talking about it, you don't win popularity contests among astrologers, but that's the rigidity and just the basic falseness, the Genesis 1 kind of falseness of assuming that people don't grow or change. It's never spelled out, but it's so implicit, that of course you're a Gemini, so you're going to run around in circles and never know what you're doing for your whole life, and you may go through that, but through is the active word, that they're paths. They're not just descriptions. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's a sermon I love to offer.
Yeah. Well, and so as I'm a trained evolutionary astrologer, and I pride myself on being coachable. I'm being a good student. And so I was sitting in class and listening to you teach, and you do your spiel about I hope each of you guys become really good at doing your Stephen Forrest impression,
Yeah.
right? But then you individuate, and the joke about when you're long and gone and we're have a lot less hair, more gray, and I'll say yes, I was influenced by the late great Stephen.
Yeah.
And for me, this is the kind of coming to fruition of this. Is I find this thing called the strongest planet, and I can't help but apply evolutionary thought to this idea. And it invites a new dimension, because we have the evolutionary aim of the signs. And now what we're bringing in is identifying that, right, the planets evolved too, right? And so this idea of like soul, right? A young Mars kid running around, tearing everything up, right? But then like imagine that potential is nurtured, and as he becomes, older and older, like how that Mars is going to mature.
Yeah, exactly. And we can, within limits of respecting individuality and human creativity, we can lay out a path, And so if I'm talking to Soul, he's a little bit young for this now, but you're Mars guy, your life could be eaten up by anger, resentment, and pointless competition. It's not your fate. That's just the dark side of this energy. That's one of the things you can do with the strong Mars. But you can evolve through it. How do you evolve through it? Well, face your fears. You know, if something scares you, it's a pretty good sign that maybe you need to face it and do it. And okay, and as you do that, it's going to lead you further up the Mars highway. And eventually you're going to find yourself, assuming you follow your path, doing the high Mars work of protecting something worth protecting. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's an idea, maybe it's an environment, maybe it's an endangered species. But Mars, the warrior, kills, and that sounds terrible. It's not like you're going to have to kill somebody, but the one time we raise the sword in violence or aggression, there's one time when that's a righteous thing to do, and that's when we're protecting something that can't protect itself. And so what we do, I mean, it took me 2 minutes to say all that. And we lay out a path, from the Mars garbage can to Saint Mars, and there's the path of the life. It's not just, okay, you're a Mars person, here's your personality. I love talking like this because it's what puts the soul in astrology. It puts the engagement back in it.
Yeah. And when I think of parenting in using astrology as a parent, I think in terms of nurturing potential.
Yeah.
And everything in astrology represents potential. But for me, when I use that word, it most powerfully gloms on to the planets. Because as the transits and the progressions go around, they're activating the natal potentials. They're activating the natal planets, and those give opportunities for the potential to manifest or to be challenged and strengthened. As we've been developing the strongest planet work together, one of the things that's become obvious to us, I mean, it is obvious, is that we can't just talk about the strongest planet, but we have to realize that the planet is in a sign.
Yeah.
The planet is in a sign. So the strength of that planet is going to manifest through the motivations of that sign. And I remember when we first introduced it to you, we showed you your strongest planet, and you're like, I get it, right? And then we went to your partner's strongest planet, and it was kind of like, right? It didn't quite fit. It fit a little bit better when we brought in the sign, And it makes me think of the idea that the signs are there, but for the signs to become activated, right?
Yeah.
Got to be something. There's got to be something in the sign.
Exactly. So, you mentioned my partner, Michelle, and Moon was their strongest planet. I'm not sure if it still is with a refined algorithm. She and I were talking last night about this very subject, and she was thinking if she had to pick a planet, it would probably be her Leo sun in the
Yeah.
10th house, and that's right opposite her Mars. So,
Yeah.
or pardon me, right opposite her Moon. So it's going to be tied up in the same aspects, and it's maybe number two. But directly pursuant of your point, so Michelle is a Moon type. It's like at first, no, she's never had a child. Uh, she's, independent artist, kind of bohemian person living a very unique and individuated kind of life, but not particularly nurturing. She finally got a cat. She finally got me, and so she's getting a little more moody in her old age. But as soon as we realize her moon is in Aquarius, it's like click, that she's followed this very unique and individuated kind of path that's outside the social norms, not marrying, not having children, not having a normal profession, and so Aquarius, it just fits. And then being an artist is kind of soulful and creative. It has that moon signature. And so it was a really important experience for me to realize the strongest planet stuff doesn't seem to work, with Michelle. And and then at Aquarius, and yeah, this does work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm excited because this is at least it's innovative in the sense of what is out there right now.
Yeah.
So I don't see it. There's books out there that really focus on the planets, but as far as what is available digitally for people to interact with, there's not much. And so I'm excited to bring something new and innovative to the market.
Me too. Me too.
And to
I hope we can bring in the subdominant planet. As we develop this stuff further, I think that it'll add a lot of granularity and individuality to it.
Yeah. We're just getting started with this, and it'll be fun to get feedback from people interacting with it, because I'm sure my guess is there's people who have been studying astrology for a long time that haven't really thought about planets this way. So sure there'll be a lot of questions and confusion, but I'm looking forward to
exactly onward through the fog.
Exactly. Looking forward to what comes from this.